Welcome back, friends, to What Drives You, where we explore our human potential and seek the most efficient and effective personal growth methods and celebrate the miracle of just being alive. I'm your honored guide, Kevin Miller. In this episode, 6 steps to liberate yourself in relationships. So, you are in a variety of relationships. How liberated do you feel? How free to be yourself and think and speak freely? How do you feel? Especially in your closest relationships. My experience in my own life and walking closely with so many others is we come together and we morph to fit and please each other. And we continue a cycle of morphing for the length of the relationship if we can handle it, of course. Often we can't, which is why we see so many relationships end or they die and linger together for decades. Mark Groves is a human connection specialist. He's founder of Create the Love. He's host of the Mark Groves podcast, and he's co-author of a new book, Liberated Love: Release Codependent Patterns and Create the Love You Desire. Mark's work, it bridges the academic and the human, inviting people to explore the good, the bad, the downright ugly, and the beautiful sides of connection. He has an Instagram account of well over 1 million followers, and he just discontinued it because he felt the platform itself is not very conducive to mental health. That depicts Mark's devotion to the heart, which you're about to hear, to love. And I start our talk off asking him at a really high level, what is he guiding us to be liberated from specifically? He started off with being liberated from patterns of relationships that we inherited. So we go from there to talk through 6 steps that he lays out to help us liberate our love. You can find Mark at markgroves.com. The Mark Groves podcast, I'd really encourage you to go subscribe there now or check it out at least. And you can find his book, Liberated Love, anywhere. As you hear us talk through this, you got questions for myself or for Mark, let me know. Email me, kmiller@kevinmiller.co. Hey, what drives you? It becomes your reality. So let's create a better reality right here, right now. All right, drive with me a moment. Let's talk about how to liberate our love. Mark, man, it's an honor to have you on the show. And actually, I'm not sure if I want to continue with what I intended or if we should just talk about you moving to Colorado. I'm game for either.
Yeah, I like this where I get some moving advice. We're looking for mountain life,
Okay,
you know?
we got it. We can hook you up, and you and I can talk forever about this topic that we're going to hit. And I have been looking at the term of non-resistance in my life overall and studying things. And so the title of your book, Liberated, I mean, that's a non-resistant term. I love that. It's not a term that we hear that much. Liberated love. I'm a wordy, so I typed in, how does the culture define liberated? Which is interesting. So here's what it says, folks. It says showing freedom from social conventions or traditional ideas, freed from imprisonment, slavery, or enemy occupation, given liberty, freed, released. So the book's called Liberated Love. So within the container, which is a term you guys use, and we'll talk about the container of love, I'm going to let you define that. Liberated from, big picture, liberated from what?
Yeah, the definition you gave is so good because it liberated from the patterns of relationship that we inherit, liberated from playing small in relationship, abandoning ourselves. We see that as romantic, this idea of putting everyone else ahead of ourselves. Now, while compromise is obviously part of a relationship, self-abandonment is not, but that tends to be the way that most people relate, but liberated love is about having a fierce dedication to the truth, about saying like, let's use this relationship to heal. Let's use this relationship for both of us to fully become the best version of ourselves first, and then bring that to the relationship. The frictions that we have, like, you use the word resistance. It's like the resistance we have in relationship is inviting. It is the material to free ourselves. The way that we handle conflict, the way that our worldviews bump against one another. Everything is made wiser when we start with 2 things and then develop a third perspective from that thing, and that third perspective, let's call that the relationship. includes both people. Makes
Okay,
sense?
well, I'm curious on your perspective of, I think you just gave something that I maybe still grapple with some, even as I have, we're talking about my kids. I've got older kids and I'm looking at them, and I came into relationship completely ignorant. I did not know myself. I knew performance. That was it. I
Mm-hmm.
did not know myself. And coming from a religious construct, the concept was, hey, we'll figure out everything together. Which in candor, we didn't do so well. We just we built on bad patterns, in our relationship initially, and ongoing. So when you look at that now, do you tend to look at, okay, let's come into a relationship and figure yourself out amongst the glory of this united, couple? Or are you saying, hey, how about you figure yourself out first and then come into the relationship? Chicken or the egg, where you land?
Both are paths. I think it's easier to start with working on yourself, but eventually you're going to bring a self to relationships. And, there's a saying that you're born in relationship, you're wounded in relationship, and you heal in relationship.
Mm.
So, yeah, if you're single, then you're going to get your poop in a group before you enter another relationship. And then if you're in a relationship, the same opportunity is there, and the thing that is a baseline need for if you want to build a relationship that is, growth oriented, is that both people are open to change. They both take responsibility for their roles, which to do that, they have to have humility, and they operate from a space of curiosity. And I'd say, like, one of the baselines of what we define as liberated love, one of the baselines of it is that there's a mutual sense of positive regard. Like this, hey, like if something's coming up for you, it's coming up for me too. I just might not know it yet. So there's a trusting in the friction. So if you start out a relationship not having relational skills, which I would argue is almost everybody,
Absolutely.
yeah, then it's actually through the relationship that you recognize what skills you need, right? Like it's only through how I handle conflict that I recognize that I'm defensive, you know?
You said a minute ago inherited patterns, and that is, again, reading through you guys your material here. I really backed up, Mark, just looking at relationships overall
Mm-hmm.
and liberated love. I mean, we don't know how to love well. As you said, we don't come
No.
equipped for this. We are brought up by parents, caregivers, whatever, and we're not equipped from this. We meet somebody, there's a little flame or whatever happens, and we come together. And yet I look at it, we're talking about kids later, and I look at so many people these days, I look at marriages, and you look at them and go, what's the point? Well, you guys aren't having any fun. And then I look at people
No.
who have kids and I think that looks miserable. Why do they inflict themselves with this? Why don't they just go along, have their happy time? But we don't. We come together and we want to unite with somebody and we want to have a kid, but we have zero training in it and we do it so poorly. And back to the title, Liberated Love, I feel like we do it so poorly and we become imprisoned to all the stuff that we didn't know, we don't know. And you talk about that in one of the chapters of the book, just being blind. I think you list out areas of blindness. I think I wrote it down. And we're so blind that we need this starter course. We go train for everything we do except relationships. And we come into it and we statistically seem to do it pretty poorly.
Yeah, there's this great quote from Eric Fromm in the book The Art of Loving where he says, there's nothing that humans fail at more that they don't take the time to learn than love. And there's something weird about how we get into a relationship, let's say in grade 8, and we just think we're supposed to be good at relationship. Like, I think that's one of the strangest ironies. We're like, we get, when I got into my first relationship when I was 17 or 16, I remember thinking, like, I guess that's it. Like, I'm getting married to this woman, because I had not been taught that there was actually still choice. Like, is this person a good fit? Not just 3 months in, but 6 months in, 2 years in. And how do we develop the skill set to walk alongside one another? So many times in relationship, we just abandon our own path and say the marriage is the path. But the marriage actually involves two people, and those two people, there still needs to be an acknowledgement of two selves. That this idea of sacrificing everything for a relationship, it sounds romantic, but it's not, because it requires that your own needs don't get met. Or you're the person that the whole relationship is revolving around, so only your needs are getting met. And you see this so much, I think it's really, we should have to take relationship starter classes to have kids. That would be ideal, because, a child, until they're 3, they can't even regulate their own nervous system. So that means that they're learning how to regulate their nervous system through their parents' nervous system, especially their mother's. But if their mother doesn't have a regulated nervous system, then it's not likely they're going to have one. And it doesn't mean we can't change over time. It doesn't mean, really, we're saying that through relationship, you can heal. You can learn how to regulate your nervous system, which is really at the core of everything. Is we are these biological beings. And I think that we forget, because we have a prefrontal cortex, we forget that we're actually biological beings with a nervous system that has memory, that it picks up before we even have words. That's why a lot of the stuff we do, we developed pre-verbal. And so it's actually through the ability of being in relationship to someone else, which the maybe it's a cosmic joke, but it's like the people we are in relationship with trigger us in the exact way that we were most triggered by a caregiver. And so we are unconsciously seeking to heal and finally resolve that thing. And we do the same to our partner, So I think when we can see that relationships are doing that they're actually an invitation to heal, then we can actually start to bring, if both people say, that's what we're going to do with our relationship, then now you bring joy into it again. You bring possibility. Isn't it weird? We'll spend our whole lives with someone totally hating them and call that love.
It's okay. What you said a second ago. So I'm a faith-based guy, admittedly, and yet I'm studying more of the science of even my faith, vibration,
Right.
and I've wondered that I came into a relationship looking for somebody who fits my frequency, the one that I figured out with my parents, how to relate to them. You talk about, who introduced us is Thais Gibson and attachment styles. And you talk about that in the book. And so I was looking for somebody that fit that. And sure enough, man, I did. And our vibrations connected and sparks. And that was great. And that wasn't the best case. Not that we weren't meant to be, but we came in just fitting that codependent vibration equation, it seems like, and then just perpetuated it back to what you said a minute ago, that the inherited patterns. And we just tend to, that's what I see. We just continued those on and built upon that. And it's not a good foundation to build on, which is what you're showcasing.
Yeah. And then the kids start to do it. The beautiful thing about all this is if we hand bags down to our kids, we can take those bags back, and we can hand bags back to the people, whether they're dead or alive, and we can hand them back to them. So we start to really say, like, okay, what's mine? What's yours? What's my responsibility? What's yours? Can we actually step into that fierce dedication to telling each other the truth? I think one of the things that really creates the prison in relationship is, one, that really marriage was not created with the skill set to hold two people who are in love. Like, really, the history of marriage is really ultimately so we could get more in-laws, and I'm sure some people don't.
Mark, I read that in your book and I really appreciated it. You made me think of you said marriage is about, and I was kind of paraphrasing, aligning families, acquiring land, procreating for survival. It wasn't made to be some fairy tale love story. It's kind of like back in the day. It made me think about work. Back in the day, you didn't choose what your work was. Your work's to go out and hunt and gather and protect yourself. Right. Everybody has the same work. Today, we can choose from a zillion things. So back in the day, maybe marriage had this utilitarian function. We don't have to do that today. We don't have to get married to need anything other than what we desire in essence. And yet we don't have, that's what you attest to. That's not our heritage. That's back to the inheritance. We didn't inherit that. We inherited a utilitarian thing. And now it's like a tool that not many people are enjoying.
Yeah, I think we culturally have this clashing between what we desire from love, and then the skills that are required to create that versus what we inherited. So, we're kind of like, you gave me a crap bag here. Like, you didn't give me the skills I actually need in order to do the thing I need to do. But the beautiful thing is those skills are available. Like part of relationship is competence, right? It's a skill set. And, that's why the premise of my work has always been create the love. Like, don't wait for it. It's not people who are lucky who get it. It's people who actually create it with the actions they take. Stephen Covey said that love is a verb. It's a verb. And the verb creates the state. And I really agree with that. And what you were saying about vibration, and I like the correlation of spirituality with science. I like how we can actually explain things. Like David Hawkins talks about, he wrote the book Power versus Force. He wrote a lot of books, but Letting Go is another great one. And he talks about how authenticity is one of the highest vibration energies. And when you look at that from a perspective of, okay, well, how does that show up scientifically in a relationship? Well, if I'm a people pleaser and I'm someone who avoids conflict, doesn't tell the truth, I orient my life around everyone else's needs, trying to fix you, save you, get you to change, get you to listen finally, get you to grow. And I'm avoiding conflict. It means I'm not actually telling you the truth of how I actually feel, which means I'm actually pretending to be someone I'm not.
Right.
On a deep level, the other person has to identify as there's something wrong with me. Like you're always trying to fix me. I feel like the person who messes up. I feel like I'm not emotional enough. I'm not a good communicator. And so they identify as being a problem. Now, what happens in this relationship dynamic, which is a very common relationship dynamic, in attachment styles, you'd see that more as anxious as the first one and avoidant as the second one. What happens is that vibrationally, these are low vibration behaviors. Neither person gets to be in the vibration of their wholeness of like, I am enough as I am. Here's some things I got to work on. Like, let's be real about that. But how do I step fully into authenticity where I tell you the truth that I'm afraid, that I'm not sure, that I feel like we take each other for granted, that I miss you, that I dislike you, like that. Can we bring all that forward? Because I would argue that if you actually say, most people, let me say that a different way. When you don't tell someone the truth because you're afraid it will end the relationship, then you're living in a relationship that requires that you silence who you are. So you're actually not that's not love. And the other side is that the very conversations that you're avoiding because you think it might break you up are actually the very conversations that deepen the connection or make the connection sever.
I'm so tracking, Mark, and this has been a new thing in real life, and somebody wrote it, and I wish I'd give them credit, and I can't think of who it was, but it was somewhere along the lines of what you're saying. If I come in and I start catering to you, pandering to you, Mark, to like me, that one, I'm being, as you just said, I'm not being honest with myself. I'm being disingenuous to myself. So I kind of don't trust me. And if you like me as a result of my performance, I really don't trust you either. Cause you're not liking me. You're liking the performance. And you talked about David Hawkins, his book, Letting Go.
Oh, so powerful.
It's kind of a Bible to me. It's one that I have to keep revisiting. It's so difficult, honestly, for me. It resonates as to what I need, but I haven't done that well. And you got me thinking just now, even, back in the day, I was raised up with, Zig Ziglar, which I adore. But Dale Carnegie and How to Win Friends and Influence People. Brilliant stuff. I love it. I recommend it. Just watch out for doing what Kevin did, which is taking the How to Win Friends and Influence People. And that became me. So that's all I'm here for, man, is how to win friends and influence people. So I'm going to connect with you. We're going to resonate. You're going to think I'm great. And that's the point. And yet I wasn't honest. I'm not honest with my feelings. I'm not honest that on the 5-hour car drive, you drove me crazy with X, or you said this. And I don't align with that at all. It actually is offensive to me. And I'm dishonest the whole time. So I'm slowly building up bricks. So I win in friends and influence people, and I'm building bricks between us. And then from a religious context, which we've mentioned a couple of times, I grew up with it's die to self. You just give, man. That's what's righteous and valiant, is not to be true to yourself. You just take care of people. It sounds righteous, but it's all self-serving. It's to protect me. It's to win me, whatever. And meanwhile, I've got this wall of bitterness. So I just splayed it myself out there for you, Mark. That has been my trajectory. And now we're back to liberated love. That's why obviously that's why you've got, 1 million followers on Instagram. You've hit a nerve with people because this is not how we have lived love.
Well, I relate a lot to your story. I mean, I grew up Catholic, so there was very much like, take care of everybody, don't, all the things. And if you do these behaviors, then you go to heaven. And if you don't, you go to hell. So there's this consequence that, I mean, I don't even get to discover till life ends, so there's they keep you hooked on that one.
Yeah.
But I say that because at the same time, I was also in sales, and I was in I worked at an electronics store when I was in college. I was good at it. I sold extended warranties to people. It was very much like the 40-year-old virgin, like the movie.
Uh-huh.
And then I also moved into pharmaceutical sales after that. Again, I was good at it, but my whole thing was about how do I manipulate human behavior? How do I get someone to change from one product to another? And throughout that timing, I had been through 2 relationships where there were giant betrayals, and I never navigated that grief, that pain, that anger. I didn't have good boundaries in my teens and my 20s. I thought that if you had a boundary, you were controlling. The news growing up, I grew up in the 80s and 90s as a teenager, and in college in early 2000, I graduated. And it's like the messaging, which I think is actually even more prolific now, is that men are bad, men are evil, men are rapists, men are murderers, men are the cause of everything wrong. And so I didn't want to be like any other of these men. So I became like, oh, I'm a good guy. I'm going to be different than every other guy. And I'm not going to let you see my pain. I remember doing a psychotherapy thing once with my wife, and the psychotherapist was doing what we call sentence stems. So like saying a sentence and we were finishing them. And my wife was speaking, and she was smiling. And he said to her, behind my smile is, and she just cracked.
Wow.
And not only was it like beautiful to experience that through her, but I saw my whole life of the smiling, of like everything behind this is good. I'm good. Nothing bothers me. I'll take all the grenades and I'll still smile.
Yeah.
But behind it was so much grief, so much unexplored anger, because I couldn't express my grief. I couldn't express boundaries. So it was like I would take too much and then react and then push people away. And I didn't know how to actually have a conversation and be conversational about where my boundaries or my values were violated much earlier by myself. And, I look back at betrayal, as I think so many of us experience. We maybe betrayed someone or we've been betrayed. And my data thus far says that 100% of the time, external betrayals are preceded by internal betrayals. So I only got to the places where I got cheated on because I betrayed myself so many times before that. Yeah. And I could say those moments of finding out about the betrayal, those are traumas, right? For people, that can be very big traumas. But I can actually say with 100% ownership now, I only got there because I left me far earlier. So if I can actually own that, then I can be thankful for the betrayal, which is, again, not minimizing the experience of the betrayal. But I have gratitude that woke me up to that way earlier in the journey. I learned that when I love people, I have to leave myself. When I love people, they hurt me. That I don't have access to self-expression. I put other people's feelings ahead of my own. Where did I learn that?
Yeah. I got a question. I'm going to let you preface it though by giving a layman's term of somatic therapy. Will you do that for me? And then I'll follow up with a question.
So somatic therapy is, somatic being the body. And then the therapy is about exploring the edges of your nervous system response. For example, recently, just to give some people an idea of the power of it, I had said earlier in the podcast that sometimes our experiences are actually pre-verbal. So we don't have words. That's why talk therapy or coaching can't access it, because you can't talk your way through something that it's a sense that didn't develop when there was language. So you can't describe it verbally.
It's why my therapist prescribed to me a couple years ago Brene Brown's recent book, Atlas of the Heart.
Yeah.
She said, Kevin, you don't even know the words behind your emotion. You don't know, not only do you know your emotions, you don't even know the words. So let's first take 101 and learn what they are. So let's read through Brene's 87 emotions, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And so somatics is really about a really skilled somatic therapist will walk you through the edges of where your nervous system starts to get dysregulated or reactive. So for example, I've been dealing with a lot of indecision recently. Uncertainty, indecision, lack of direction. But I knew that I needed to explore something to do with my nervous system and social media, because I could feel like when I was using it, I could feel my body being what, the language we would use is activated. And we know this when we're in conflict and all of a sudden we get flooded and we can't use our voice, or we get really reactive. That's activation. That's in the work of the nervous system. They'd say there's like a window of tolerance, and the window of tolerance is the capacity that you have to hold the potential lack of safety in a dialogue. And again, when I say safety, I'm not talking like your physical safety, because obviously you can't have a dialogue when you don't have physical safety. But I mean like your perceived sense of safety. Because you could have someone say, oh yeah, I don't like your hat, and it could make you blow up, which is not an appropriate response to the stimulus, right?
Yes.
So you know that there's something, a memory that's being activated. We know about that reactivity when we think of something like PTSD. You're at war, a bomb hits, your friend dies, you're walking down the street, you hear a car backfire, and your body goes immediately into the state just from hearing the sound. So this happens to us in dialogue. It's like this happens to us in conflict. Is like, you think about like when you get reactive in conversation, a great question to ask yourself is, how old do I feel right now? And sometimes it'll be like 5, 7, 13. Sometimes it'll be all of those ages. But you really start to look for like, where was the earliest moment I remember responding like this?
Yeah.
Now, I say all that to give context to when I was working with the somatic therapist. She said, oh my gosh, it's really interesting. Like, you're stuck in freeze. Your nervous system is stuck in freeze, which is immobilization. We see this with an animal when its life's in threat and it just stops. And it's showing up as confusion, immobilization, uncertainty. But it's actually that at the baseline, your nervous system is protecting you from making any choices. And I was like, it was such a profound realization. And with my therapist, my somatic therapist, when I was talking about my relationship with my wife, when we got back together, we had dated for 4 years, broke up, and then got back together before we got married. And I remember saying to her, oh my gosh, I have great access to boundaries. Like, I express myself, I say what I stand for. And I got to this realization that a lot of times in our first relationship, I said like, hey, I can't be with someone who can't fully choose this relationship. And then we would talk about it, and then I would stay. And I remember having this awareness through somatic therapy that I left my body in circumstances that I shouldn't have been in. I was so used to bypassing my own intuition and my needs that I left myself. And so I all of a sudden had this, because when you put pieces like that together, and for anyone who reads our book, this will happen because we walk people through the blueprint of what creates why you relate, is you'll then see your whole life through the new lens. And you'll see all these moments that you had access to a choice that you now see. Yeah. And then we'll often experience shame for not having chosen that thing, because we see the world now through a new lens. Oh, I could have chosen differently. And a lot of people will get stuck there because they don't know how to process the shame or guilt or whatever it might be. But it's actually through first recognizing what's happened, but it's actually through embodying that today. Like, okay, I'm going to honor those experiences today by fully being in choice. And the moment I had that awareness, I shared with my wife, Kylie. I just had this realization, and I will never leave myself again in circumstances that are not where I'm fully being shown up for too.
Which I want to continue that is also saying that's a gift to the relationship.
Yeah.
Because that's
Fully.
still, I still have the wiring and then it goes, oh, that feels self-serving and selfish. But if I do that and leave myself, forfeit myself, well, like you said, bypass my own intuition needs. If I do that and just continue with you, I've just built up I put another brick in the wall. I just distanced myself to you. So I'm screwing you by doing that. How much better for me to go, oh, and this, Mark, is, I don't know how to marry I grew up in the 70s. I was born in 70. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And man, there's no place for emotions, especially for men. And I wonder in the culture today, as we seek authenticity, I still feel like we are completely ignorant and infants in understanding our own emotions and feelings. I mean, that's just not something. And so even if I look and go, oh, okay, this somatic stuff Mark's talking about. So I'm supposed to pay attention to my body, my nervous system, and how I feel. So here I am in a situation, I feel something's off. I don't know what it is. First off, I have no idea. And I'm supposed to be honest about it and authentic.
Right.
I don't know what it is. So I got to go back and do the work. And this is my own therapist, been working on for years. Kevin, go back, sit with that and figure that, pull out Brené's book if you need to, figure out what is it you're feeling. I'm feeling disgust. I don't know. That's one I would have never thought of, disgust. Or actually the one that she did bring me to that I do relate to is humiliation. Never would have used that until I read Brené's book. And I read that and go, oh my gosh, that's like top 5 for me, maybe top 3 feelings of humility. I had no idea. So now that I know that, now go back into the relationship or, into a social setting or whatever, or a discussion and go, oh, there it is. I'm feeling humiliated. Okay. So now I'm supposed to be honest to my own boundaries or my own feelings with the person. But what is my nature? So this is my story for, my nature is to go, hey, you did that. You did something wrong. You did something bad, or I don't like that. And it's blame and point. And of course, then, the therapist is going, no, you got that one wrong. That's not what you do. You say, how do you feel, Kevin?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So now we're back to, you said this. And when you did, this is a story I wrote in my head. This is what it meant to me. This is how I felt. Can we work through this? I mean, it's like asking me to speak Greek.
Yeah.
I don't speak Greek. I have no idea what to do high level physics, math. I don't.
Like Goodwill Hunting.
Yes.
I get it. Like a beautiful mind algorithm of it.
Yeah. And to that degree, it brings me back to, I'd rather, would you die for your wife? Absolutely, man. I'll jump in front of her and catch a bullet. Okay. Will you figure this emotional stuff out? Let me just do the bullet. Can I just do the bullet thing? Because this is, and so there, and so as we're talking about liberating, I feel this, and I've got to go figure out myself and then go forward and go, hey, this is how I feel, not what you did. And we're back to the no training. We have no concept of this out in the culture, which of course is why you're sitting here teaching us. This is stuff that pretty much all of us are going to have to learn later in life, unless we're blessed to have, Mark and his wife as our parents, and they can teach us this as kids. But otherwise we're ignorant. We're totally ignorant and inept.
Yeah. There's something, you're just pointing to so many truths and realities for everybody. And I think for men, there is not a lot of modeling, and really the only way we learn how to use the right words in the right moments is by practice, but also by witnessing, by hearing other people, by listening to conversations. That's why I think short form content on social media has amplified so much division, because we don't hear two people with different perspectives actually explore the nuances of something. And then because it's not modeled, we then don't know how to embody it. It's like children learn empathy through witnessing people communicating, and they then learn the body language that goes to emotions, and they learn to mirror. And so if a parent is always on a phone or a kid's always on a device, they're actually not learning mirroring. They're not learning empathy. And so I don't know what that'll do to the future, but it's probably not great. I think social media has already amplified such a narcissistic way of being, which these are great tools, but these are all playing into our lives today, right?
Yeah.
And I say all that to add context because, when you're in a circumstance and you feel your body getting activated, even just saying, oh, right now I feel activated, and not needing to put a label on it first, just because for a lot of people, they don't even notice the activation. And then they're so busy and they create busy lives and they go on their devices. And actually a really good sign that you're activated is that you're always busy. You can't stop. You're always doing new things. You're always going from one thing to the next because you have a hard time being with your own experience and your own emotions. From a nervous system perspective, people who are more anxiously attached, which we would just like quickly, that would be like you're more of a pursuer. You're the person who maybe starts the conversations more. You're the one who's reading the books. You're the ones who's doing all that. They have a hard time self-regulating. So they have a hard time actually just sitting with their own feelings. And so what happens is when they are activated, they text somebody, they call somebody, they over pursue, because they can't hold the energy. And someone who is more avoidant, who withdraws, who shuts down, they have a hard time co-regulating. They have a hard time being in the experience of another nervous system and actually being with someone else's disappointment, upset, whatever it is. And so we can learn how to change all this, but you're right, man. We come into it ignorant, not by our own choice, but because if you think about it, like this is what gets modeled to us as kids or doesn't. But the beautiful thing is you can rewire it all.
You can. It's I spend a lot of time. We were talking before the show about my guys group, my adventure group. A lot of them are 40 to 60 years old. And we're talking about some of this stuff, but a lot of them are like me, man. And they just, like, you use the word activated. Is it fair to is triggered relevant?
Yeah, same.
Okay.
Same words.
A lot of them, like me, at least historically, they don't know that. They don't activate it. I mean, they're not. They're just, you just take stuff. You don't pay attention. They're so numb. So numb to the emotions from a lifetime of not having it modeled in childhood and then not teaching it. And then you're just in a performance world where, I mean, again, we were talking about that, I was a pro cyclist. I'm not looking to pay attention to any pain or thought, or you just go 110% and go for the line and kill yourself there.
You bypass the warnings.
And the world, and do that as an entrepreneur, man. The world applauds that stuff, and then put that crap out there on social media, like you're talking about, and never quit, conquer the world, and you get lots of acclaim like that. But then we run into the relational issues, and we don't know where we are triggered, when we're activated, and especially, I'm going to guess you're just talking about anxious avoidant. That tends to come out. We can see that, but on the avoidant attachment style, which is me, when I just retreat and withdraw and stonewall, that's just my go-to. I'm hardly even aware that I'm doing it. I don't. I could be sitting and talking to you, and I'm gone, and I don't even know.
You disassociate.
Yeah.
And that's you look at the research on childhood experiences where the kid actually has to leave their bodies. Like, I was sleep trained. A lot of parents sleep train. Sleep training actually does cause disassociation because from a neurodevelopmental perspective, and I know this can be controversial for people, but it's just the way that nature works. Is like a little baby thinks the baby is in a cave, and if it screams and no one comes, it has to stop screaming because a wolf might come and eat it. We're that fundamentally simple when we're developing. And so if no one comes, then I learn the message that when I need somebody, no one comes. And so when we learn that type of information, because I've interviewed sleep experts on this, I'm a parent now, so I had to look into all this stuff, and I'm very fascinated by it. The reactivity is a lot of shame, and I get, it's not the behavior itself let's not look at that as the problem, but that there aren't the circumstances to support parents to be resourced enough to be there for the child. Because of course, you got a single mom with 3 kids. Sleep training might be the only solution that she doesn't lose her mind.
Yeah.
You know. So again, I think it's always important to add context, but at the same time, we still have children who are taught that when you need something, no one's going to come, and they become adults who actually believe that. And I say all this because avoidance and anxiety, anxious attachment and avoidance. Would your audience, do you want me to give like a real quick?
At least, yeah.
Based on research where they looked at how a child responded to their mother when the mother left the room and came back. So the first one, mom leaves the room, comes back, baby goes to mom, won't leave mom's side, is like really the underlying belief. If you leave, I'm not sure you'll come back. Anxious attachment. Mom leaves, mom comes back, baby reunites with mom, connects with mom, goes back to playing. I trust you. Secure attachment. Mom leaves, mom comes back, baby's like, didn't even notice you were gone. No big deal. Meh. That's avoidant attachment. But physiologically, that child is actually experiencing the same activation and arousal, like fear, as the first child. It's just showing up as apathy. Now, when you think about it, I like to, instead of thinking about your attachment style, which is something you're prone to, not something you are, it's just when there's a lack of safety or a potential fear for a lack of safety. And when I'm talking about that, I mean emotionally, mainly. Then it makes us go into a certain type of choice, which again, it would be that programming in the neural pathways. When I said, what age do you feel when you do that thing? That's what we're talking about. So for someone who's anxious, when there's too much space, they're afraid of too much space between them and another person. When you're avoidant, you're afraid that there's not enough space. So really what we're talking about is two people and how they orient to space is different. And that's why it's so easy to go what I did. I went from anxious, experienced all those betrayal, to avoidant because I never had to become secure. So it's easy to pivot. So we talk about in the book is becoming earned secure. And that's by actually embodying and creating the behaviors that a securely attached person would create. So when someone is avoidant, we tend to demonize them in the literature, in the book attached. They don't really give a positive outlook on avoidance. They're basically the ideas, and if you look at social media, the majority of people who are on social media just by nature who are seeking out information are more anxiously attached. And so the conversation is like, well, if avoidance just figured it out and actually learned how to stay close to people, then I wouldn't have to chase them. Well, that makes logical, mathematical, algorithmic sense. But the truth is that if you had someone who finally showed up for you, you wouldn't know how to receive it because the whole part you're playing out is actually chasing them. And so you don't have to chase anyone anymore, you have to step out of your adaptive strategy, like your survival strategy as a kid. So you have to go you have to go into the unknown space of actually trusting that someone will be there for you. Now, the reason I say all of that is because for avoidant people, there's almost always a deep desire for relationship and connection. It's just that they might have experienced trauma. So it's like the people I was supposed to love most weren't safe to be around. And the other side of it is that if I get close to people, I'm then responsible for their feelings. I'm responsible for them. So I don't know how to set a boundary or create. So I don't know how to actually delineate their responsibility for their feelings from mine. So what I've learned to do is to just withdraw. I don't know how to be with someone else's dysregulation, with their emotions, with their upsetness. So I'm just going to shut down and leave. Now, of course, that pairs so perfectly with someone whose worldview is when I get upset, people leave. So, and the other person's like, well, when people get upset, they smother me. They become too much, right? So it's like this perfect marriage, pun intended, because it ends up being relatively imperfect. But if we see it as an opportunity to heal both of those patterns and become adults, then we can actually change.
Okay, and what you said, and thank you for saying it because everybody says it in a different way. I mentioned before you and I were connected through Thais Gibson, and I don't know when this episode's publishing, but folks, a couple months ago before this, we did a show, or I did a show with Thais, and
She's brilliant.
she's attachment style. She's the source. So please go check her out. Personaldevelopmentschool.com, and you can go take a quick free test and find out your attachment style. Mark, you just described me. I'm dismissive, avoidant, very thoroughbred, unfortunately.
Thoroughbred.
Yeah. And I learned that well. Okay. I want to take what you just said. All this stuff we've been talking about. I mean, again, the book's called Liberated Love, and I'm pulling up the tagline: release codependent patterns and create the love you desire. We've just been going through all this stuff. Everybody listening has related to some aspects of this in yourself, in your relationships, in your significant other, whatever, in your parenting. We've been going through it. So here we go. The premise is we obviously don't know ourselves well relationally. We're not that skilled naturally. We've got to learn that. Then we come into a relationship and it's going to get exacerbated, but there's the opportunity to figure stuff out. There we're into liberated love. That's the preface here because I wanted to read real quick if I can, Mark. Liberated love is. This is straight out of your book. And folks, I want you to hear this. Liberated love is 1, being able to access real choice in our relationships. 2, reconnect to the energy of love and sharing it in a way that serves and honors life. 3, take responsibility for your life and how you show up in relationships. 4, devote to truth. 5, honoring someone else's path alongside our own. And 6, practice unconditional positive regard for both self and others. There's so much to say on all those. I mean, we can pick apart all of them. They're just huge. It's easy to hear. I just read them. People heard it. It made sense, whatever. We nod to it and we don't do it well. And we're not going to do it well without a significant amount of effort and practice and repetition, just like anything. But I want to break them down a little bit at least and let you kind of maybe unpack where we think we know this maybe, but we don't, where we're missing it. Like 1, being able to access real choice in our relationships. Now, if somebody's in a really terrible relationship and it's abusive and whatever, you may connect that you don't feel like you have choice. But for most people, they would kind of think, no, I've got choice. But then when we look at it, we all live in a way of, especially when you bring spouses out and they start complaining about the other, and we talk in ways that we obviously don't feel like we've got a lot of choice.
Right.
But we're kind of confined, we've got excuses for this and we've got this. And you start hearing people talk and you think, man, this doesn't feel like you have choice. So help us with that, understand that where we are missing it.
Yeah, there's a few layers in the first part is I've always loved the saying that the opposite of trauma is choice. So even when we're in circumstances of relationship that are not obviously ideal, there's an idea that we can't leave. But the truth is, if we're dedicated to fierce reality, is you can. It's just that you don't think you can. But if we can access, because I would say one of the detrimental impacts of inherited vows in marriage, one of them being till death do us part, is this idea that I always think of that one as that meant to be a metaphorical death or a literal death. Because if you think about it, that commitment means that I can't go anywhere. Now, we know that when the Divorce Act went through, first in the late 60s and then got revised in the 80s, divorce went way up. Of course, because what happened was all of a sudden a state didn't have to approve whether you could get divorced or not. So a lot of people got divorced due to abuse, due to many things. In the 80s, they revised it and said the separation didn't have to be 3 years. It could only be 1 year. And people were like, well, I could hack a year. So it went up again. And then you also have the confounding factors of the sexual revolution, all of those things going on, and the feminist revolution, all those things going on. But I say all that because what happens is when you don't think you can leave, then you actually will avoid everything that might end up causing leaving. When a society shames people for breakups and divorces and relational endings and calls them failures, then you're going to do everything you can to not become a failure because your culture, your religion, your whatever has already taught you that it means exile. Now, humans have two needs fundamentally. We have the need to belong, and we have the need to be authentic and self-express. But when authenticity threatens belonging, belonging wins. So basically what that means, if you being you means the dissolution of your community, your family, or your relationships, you will abandon who you are to keep the relationships. That's a survival-based thing. I think the internet has massively changed that. Globalization has changed that. Flying has changed that. All cars have changed that. But at the end of the day, true relating honors the fact that you're choosing to be there. And a reality is that in any moment, if we were in a marriage, you could leave me in any moment. That's not because I want to operate from a fear that you might leave me, because of course, if you say to someone, well, I'm just going to break up with you, that completely eradicates the safety of the relationship.
Right.
But what it's saying is, well, if you could leave, then you're choosing to stay. So I'm honoring the sacredness of your choice. That way, I'll actually do the work to become and stay a good choice. Out of everyone in the world my wife could choose, she picks me. I consider that to be an honor. Out of everyone in the world I pick her. That's me. That's a sacred choice. And when people are relating, and I hear this a lot, oh, well, you know what? I'm dating this guy, and this guy, it's a friends with benefits. He doesn't want a relationship, but I do. And I'm like, well, till you can say no to what is not aligned, then what is aligned, you won't even be able to recognize. You won't be able to choose it because you don't have access to a no. And this could be boundaries. This could be anything we do. If you don't have access to a no when something is unhealthy or not aligned, then your yes is not a real yes. It's filled with small print. So when we talk about having access to real choice, it is also about creating the circumstances that allows choice. For example, my wife is currently not working. She's taking care of our son because he's 13 months old. So I'm paying for more things. Now, power dynamics exist no matter what in relationships, but can we talk about the power dynamics? So the conversation we had was, hey, historically, when you look up your family tree, what did it look like when there was a provider? Oh, well, I didn't have access to my voice. That's what I witnessed in my family system. Okay. What comes up for you because I'm paying for things? Oh, well, this comes up for me. This stresses me out. These are the things that if I was insecure, I'd get defensive about those things. But I don't. I'm like, oh, these are really happening, so we might as well resolve them. And it's like, okay, well, how could we construct things so that you have access to choice and you have access to, like, should we create a bank account that's only yours? I have no access to? What amount of money would need to be in that account for you to feel safe? If I was insecure, I'd be going, she might take that money and leave me. But instead, what I'm actually saying is, I'm not interested in this power dynamic being used because a lot of people do use paying to control relational dynamics. And you see this a lot with love bombing and giving gifts, is they like rapidly escalate the relationship. They buy lavish gifts because people often get their needs met with wants. So like, I want a gift, but what I really want is you to love me. Anyways, my point being that it allows her access to real choice. And it allows me to explore the edges of like, have I used paying for things as a way to maintain power or closeness with people? I've certainly done that. It's a message all men are taught. Become a good provider and then you have value.
Yep.
So that's, I know, a long answer to.
No, it's great. And it brings up something that I had written earlier, that again, I'm going to read it again, being able to access real choice in our relationships. That's number one for liberated love, to have real choice. And back to marriage, and this is not diss marriage, but man, that's how I came at it, especially from a staunch religious construct. Yeah, it's a padlock. It's a padlock you put around, and that's the value of it. That's what keeps you together. And dude, if it's only a padlock keeping you together and it wouldn't be otherwise, that's a bad container. And that's how most of us came into it. And then, and in addition, and you said, I'm again paraphrasing that if I'm not willing to be honest and authentic, because I may jeopardize or threaten the relationship. And I think I'm being, this again, this is where I came from. And I think a lot of guys did, a lot of people thought of being valiant. I'm being valiant. I'm
Same.
being maybe even the bigger man to say,
Yeah.
use that term,
The martyr.
the martyr. And I'm just going to take it. And I'm not going to be honest. That is, I am harming the relationship by proxy and not being honest. Dude, that was me. And I think that's why it's so hard to face it too, Mark, is because I know my heart. My heart was good.
Right.
I meant good. I really did. I mean, there's always self-serving in everything that we do, I think, and everything I do. But I really thought, if I looked at it objectively, I thought, no, I'm keeping my mouth shut to keep things civil and to not respond in defensiveness or in anger. And I'm doing all this because meanwhile, though, I'm building up walls. That's my terminology. I'm building up walls of bitterness is what I did until now. All of a sudden I can't even see the person, can't feel the person, or I'm burnt out. That's what I did. I burn out on myself, and it's a flip flop. It's so counterintuitive to what we're taught. And yet I think we'd all look at it and go, yeah, but it's not working. We need to be counterintuitive because what is natural, normal, the inherited normal is not working. Right.
Yeah. Such a important thing to note is the altruistic nature of people pleasing comes from a good place. It does. It's just that it also comes from a manipulative place. So it is toxicity dressed up as altruism. And it's like nice guy syndrome, which is a more famous term, right? There's a great book by Robert Glover called No More Mr. Nice Guy. But essentially, it's like, if you're the people pleaser, then your niceness is actually contrived on some level. So if we can both be like, because I identify so much with your way of being in your story, in that I've done the same and that's how I lived. But when I could say it came from a good place and I did it to minimize conflict, I did it to keep people close, then I can actually see that unconsciously I'm actually trying to manipulate the relationship. Because I'm afraid
you're stepping on my toes. Because hearing that when that was brought to me, Mark, that's actually manipulative, was devastating.
Oh, I remember learning that and being like, I'm not manipulative. I'm nice.
Because again, I just go back to how I felt. And in there, I thought, no, but I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
Same. Yeah. I'm
not saying anything. I'm not defending. I'm not retorting. I'm not responding to anger. I'm keeping my cool, stuffing it. And I'm going on and not addressing it. And that is, again, valiant. And so to have somebody say, no, that was manipulative. I really don't want to hear that.
I know exactly that. I remember the first time someone told me that it was manipulative. I was like, F that. Like, I'm not manipulative. Because I'm nicer than other people.
Yes.
And I could really sense
I can control my emotions.
Right. The righteousness, which is so interesting because I think, I grew up Catholic, so there was so much of that messaging of like really self-abandonment over everything. And I think where women have and continue to be taught that, men were really taught like, just put your head down and just like get it done. I think one of the things I haven't written this article, but I'm going to, and it's really like, I wanted to call it the forgotten generation of men. And really because there was a feminist revolution and many waves of it, they worked 8 to 8 at factories and did all these jobs. And now people change careers much more than they used to. But they put their head down and they would come home and they would be a stranger in their own house. And look, I'm not dismissing the patriarchal structure of relationships. So let's just acknowledge that there was control and all the things. Right. But I'm like, no one was happy. It's not like the guy was happy working in a mine or the guy was happy working at this job he hated, But I think the way it's forgotten is that all of a sudden there's a waking up to and a wanting more from relationship. And men were not given the tools to develop emotional fluency. And so all of a sudden their partners and they're not a victim of the circumstance, but the context is important, which is all of a sudden their partners in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever, which again, they're allowed to. I think we lack compassion for the masculine side, which is like, all of a sudden they want all this stuff from relationship, and the dude's going, I did everything I was supposed to do. Like, I was told, just put your head down, provide for the family. That's what I did. Now my kids are mad at me. My wife's leaving me. And I think there lacks compassion for that side. And when there's a lack of compassion for the context for their experience, they then get angry, and it fuels the red pill movement and the more extremist version of male uprisings, which I think Andrew Tate and that type of archetype appeals to, because he's going like, masculinity is nothing to be. Now he says some really messed up stuff, but I'm saying the reason there's an appeal there is because he says masculinity is nothing to be ashamed of. And it's like, well, actually, there's a few things we've done. It's not masculinity. It's just the way men have shown up.
Yeah.
And we conflate masculinity with toxicity. And it's not. It's just unintegrated trauma, unhealthy relating.
It's interesting, Mark, because within that too, in that analogy, I mean, I lived it out. We talked about that. I got a lot of kids, and, I can't nurse them. I can't grow them. And so it by proxy pushed me into the workplace and had my wife at home. Now, I did go after work for the most part, not always, that I had joy in, that I found some purpose in. So I wasn't the guy who hated his work, but the pressure to provide was there. The guilt for, am I there for the kids enough? And I scrambled so much as an entrepreneur trying to be Superman, to be totally available and totally, provide that pressure. And so, when we come back and after the years go by and you've been doing that and she's been at home, and it creates this cultural construct too, where of course I'm getting a lot more accolades than she is being out in the workplace.
Right.
And yet, man, there's so much to unpack there that we, for the most part, didn't during that time. You're just doing it. You're just, like you said, head down, you're both doing your thing and not being honest with how you feel. I've been watching the show, This Is Us.
Oh, man, that show's so good.
Oh my gosh. And some of the characters,
episode, I'm like, crying.
It is. And them talking, some of the dynamics with the couples of talking and just continuing and trying to work through stuff, I think they have a lot of dysfunction in it, but it's beautiful. I mean, that's
real dysfunction. It might be one of the best shows for the encapsulation of the human experience, like that did it well.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I don't typically watch shows, but that's been one I come back to.
That show's so good. If you want a good like family comedy, Catastrophe is my favorite. It's so funny. It's a couple who get pregnant by accident, and it went on a work trip. He gets a woman pregnant, and then they decide to go for it, like have do it, and it's so funny. I really appreciate what you're saying, because I think actually for the space of the relationship to hold the grief of all those experiences that you're talking about, like my wife and I really, especially early on, I needed to process that there was this real juxtaposition that was existing in my experience, which was I both needed to provide and wanted to be present, and they were at odds, and there was never enough of either. And that was hard to navigate, because what I felt culturally, maybe because I'm also exploring these things and I'm always constantly like seeing my experience versus the cultural expectation of my experience. I'm very fascinated with relational patterns, human patterns. And I was like, wow, culture doesn't have a lot of compassion for this conflict that I'm experiencing. Like, just deal with it. Like, be present as a father, be the best father you could be, and make money. Like, what are you complaining about? And I'm like, oh, wow, but my wife actually, her and I got to explore this space so beautifully, where she's like, I see that sometimes, like, I express something and it causes you to feel guilt because I actually want you to feel guilt so that you show up more. And so I'm like noticing that I have weaponized that. And so we can have these conversations, because we talk about in the book that the body is the somatic canary in the coal mine, that like what comes up in your body. So when I was feeling this, like, I feel guilty that I can't be present all the time, and I also can't provide enough. And, I was changing how my business was operating at the same time. So there was a lot of stress and continues to be. And can we hold the stress too? Like, can we just acknowledge that exists? And I feel very blessed because like through the, what's written in the book is the capacity to hold everyone's experience and not make them wrong for their experience. And her taking ownership for that, there was part where it was like, sometimes I think I do use guilt as a way of like trying to get you to show up more instead of saying we miss you and we need you. And I was like, oh, that's like made me emotional because all of a sudden it was like, that's really what was underneath the desire.
It's Mark, I'm sitting here listening to you and thinking about the This Is Us show and then you talking about you and your wife and thinking it does. I feel this or had this vision of being like a director to our own lives, talking about the somatic stuff. Our body's going to do what our body's going to do a lot. Obviously, we're trying to be aware and trying to be great if we could just do every moment with perfect motive, perfect behavior, perfect action, but we're probably not going to. And so if we can step back in this director's chair and be able to watch ourselves or even to let the moment happen and go, okay, pause, stop. Okay, guys, let's rewind that. Let's see how that happened. Okay. He said that, she said that could be taken this way. Mark we know Mark's attachment style, so I'm sure he took it this way. And she did that. And she's going to say she didn't mean to make him feel guilty, but she kind of did. But that was kind of relevant. And that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
The body's going to do it. You go back to the somatic aspect. It's going to do these things. We're going to react. But if we can step back, then, but man, the amount of, what would you say? Confidence or humility that we have to be able to do that, because naturally I am self-protective and I'm going to defend and I'm going to act with that, again, inherited patterns that I don't even, if I don't take the time, I'm not going to recognize. It's big work. I mean,
it is. It requires humility. That's the key. Is like most of us don't have the capacity to hold that we're not showing up in our best because we correlate not showing up as our best as not being worthy. So we attach our worthiness to our behavior, which behaviors are not who you are. That's why you can change them. But when you were taught that your behavior dictated your value, then that's the gift of recognizing the pain of that, is actually needing to decouple it. One thing I find very fascinating about personal growth work or entering therapy or something like that, the motivation actually almost always comes from a challenge or a failure of sorts, right? Like, I don't have the emotional fluency. My childhood stuff is showing up in my life. So I'm like, what brings me to the need to change is the fact that I feel like something's wrong with me that needs to be changed. And that's great. If that's what brings you to it, that's what brings almost everyone to it. But eventually, what has to happen is the self-perception has to be, it's not that something's wrong with me that needs change, it's that I'm doing something that needs change. So it's not evidence of my inadequacy, it's actually evidence of my possibility. So that fundamental shift is huge.
It really is. It brings me back. I mean, when we were talking earlier, Mark, before the show, we had an instance at the children's home that we used to serve at on this Native American reservation, and there was an instance with one of the house parents and a kid, and them labeling, he's a bad boy. He's a bad boy. We knew enough to know you don't say that, but he behaved poor. It was bad behavior. And to come back to what you said about, we attach, when I hear that I was manipulative or hear that I behaved poorly, I hear it in the way of, I am Kevin is manipulative, or I am a bad boy, as opposed to, no, it's like we need another, again, that voice in our head that says, you're good, you're worthy, you're full. That was off. That wasn't cool. Apologize for that, but you're great. And we don't hear that. And it comes back to that. We're back to, I guess, self-worth, self-identity, as if we don't have that solid, we're in jeopardy of screwing things up. Yeah.
Yeah. If we could have compassion for why we do it, then we can explore why we do it. It's like having compassion for where something comes from just gives you the opportunity to see that it's not your fault.
Yeah.
because everything you do until this moment that you're listening to this podcast, till this moment, till an awareness, was actually adaptive and important to get you here so that you could change what you do. Because what worked as a kid and a teenager might not work in your adult relationship. And so it's actually the journey of initiation into adulthood is to transition your behaviors. There's a famous quote from, well, it's not famous enough, so maybe this will make it famous, but it's from a guy named Francis Weller, who's a psychotherapist and calls himself a soul activist. And he says, we spend our lives seeking belonging, and at some point we have to become the place of welcome. And think about that. That's like the true initiation to being an adult is finally saying, for all the people who are looking to belong, you belong here.
Yeah.
And that's what we spend so much of our time seeking. And it's like, instead of lamenting the family or the parents who didn't give us something, how do we become the adults who have it and give it? That's the gift. That's the work, is like, and look, I think entrepreneurship is actually equal to, almost, if not, of a personal growth journey and self-worth and our challenges and leadership and interpersonal skills with our employees, our teammates, our bosses, or whatever. All of that, again, is more opportunity to recognize what we need to heal. That's why all of it is material to liberate yourself. All of it is material to stop attaching. Like, if I attach my worth to providing, it's because I was taught that my value as a male was in my providing. But that's not true. My value is innate. It doesn't mean I'm not going to wrestle with that, because that's reality, right? So it's like, how do I wrestle with that, but also not let it define me?
That statement, Mark, from Francis Weller, to become the place of welcome, reminded me, I don't know how long ago it was, and it was some aspect, it was probably like a self-affirmation that, look in the mirror and say, and I realized I don't look in the mirror.
Yeah.
I don't want to look in the mirror, and not from forget vanity or whatever. It wasn't, if you got to comb your hair or something like that, but to look at me, I don't consider Kevin's a tool. We just get things done. I don't know. I don't even know if it was an I don't like. It's irrelevant. To look in the mirror. To become a place of welcome. Because when you said that, I first thought I got to first be that place. That's been the journey. That's been a lot of the journey to become the place of welcome for myself, me and me. Can I do that? And then from that, be a place of welcome for others. I want to go to the second one here. Again, folks, this is the book Liberated Love is. We just went through number 1, being able to access real choice in our relationships. Number 2 is reconnect to the energy of love and sharing it in a way that serves and honors life. Mark, I'm going to admit, I continually struggle with some of the aspects of coming back to yourself, reconnecting, some of those terminologies, because I'm concerned that a lot of people like that reconnect to the energy of love. Did they have anything to connect to? Was there ever any? Or is it how I'm asking you, I'm not poking at the concept, but poking, can we reconnect? Or for some people, is it discover for the first time? Play with that.
Yeah, well, I think the first part of is it discovering for the first time? Yeah, for some of us it is. We might never have treated ourselves as sacred. I think that, like, when you actually think about the connection that exists between you and other as sacred, then we might be like, okay, well, if my connection to Kevin as a friend is sacred, how might I treat him? Well, love is telling people the truth. So it's not only going to be about affirming and speaking potential, which if I tell you something I think is positive feedback, then I'm actually speaking potential and love into you. Like we're using the container of the frictions of our experience. And so to connect to the energy of love is, again, to connect to this energy of like actually supporting and believing and speaking the potential into one another. You are always made better by another. And that doesn't mean you're not whole on your own, of course. So we start that way. And really, if you want to think about wholeness, which is the word integrity, right? A boundary is what preserves who we are. And boundaries, how we think of them about keeping toxic relationship or toxic behaviors out, but they're also about containing ourselves and not oversharing, not doing whatever. So and boundaries are drawn around your values. They're drawn around what's important to you. A lot of us don't even, when I ask someone, what do you need? What do you want? They're like, I don't know. Like, I spend my whole life about everybody else. And I'm like, and usually there'll be this awareness, like, I can't believe I've spent my whole life. Like, I wish I had learned this 5 years ago, whatever. And I'm like, well, first off, the message was available. You just weren't ready. You weren't listening. And that's okay. But what an adventure this is now. Like, you don't know who you are. You get to discover it. Like, live life with that question.
Wow.
And to actually come back to the energy of love, imagine if through your experience of being in a relationship with someone who doesn't treat you well, you recognize that you are worthy of being treated well. And that's innately the conflict when we're tolerating behaviors that are not loving. And we actually say to ourselves, what if I was to treat myself as sacred? Well, if you set that kind of standard, and maybe from a more like religious-based language, we might say like devotion, like truly devoted to who you are and what you care about. That is a devotion to love. If you treat yourself as sacred and then bring that and treat your partner as sacred, you're not going to tolerate any crap. Because when you set this standard for yourself and someone comes in and disrespects your time, disrespects you as a being, you're already like, nah, this container, this meat suit, this soul, it's already thriving. And what happens relationally there is that I don't seek you to source my happiness from or my well-being. I actually become a state of it and then bring that to the relationship. Because if someone is what determines whether you're happy or not, then if I was in charge of your cosmic education, I'd have them leave you so you could realize that that's not where your happiness lives. And that's the gift of being left and your whole life falling apart, is you realize that your life was about somebody else, and that's the gift. So that principle then becomes how we orient to everything, because then it's like, oh wait, I can't just step on ants anymore. I remember being a kid and ants going across the sidewalk, and I can remember actually crushing them.
Yeah.
And now I look back and I'm like, like I can't, like when my son is around like a bug or something, I'm like, no, like just thank you for showing up in our life. Like honor all life. Mosquitoes, I have.
Fair enough.
There's some sort of sacred contract with mosquitoes where they're like, just let them bite you. And I'm like, they like me. I can't. It's so, nah.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, gosh, I'm going to take us right into the third one there, because you speak to it somewhat there, taking responsibility for your life and how you show up in a relationship. That one, we talked beforehand. We've got, a lot of mutual friends, Vienna Farron and Britt Frank and Terry Cole. They are going to be my first group of people on the roundtable series that we're doing. That's our topic, Mark, is responsibility. And I want to take a kind of a radical, look at responsibility that's a term we use, radical responsibility. What is that? And we look relationally, and back to your commentary, criticism, I'll say, on social media, that it is not a place that I see that fosters personal responsibility. It fosters polarization, blame, accusation, right, wrong, good, bad, black, white, and not a place to say, look, this is back to compassion, even, and having that for people, but to take personal responsibility for our perceptions, for our views, for our choices, for our beliefs, kind of for everything. And I'm tempted to veer to the side of stupid responsibility, of taking way more than you can with compassion. Now, I've missed that one, admittedly, Mark, I have. But that one, as number 3, I'm going to read again. Take responsibility for your life and how you show up in a relationship. Because I want to say, you've got that as number 3 on what liberated love is. And I would say it's because that you see, as I feel like I do in the culture, and too often naturally in myself, we are not bred to take responsibility for ourselves. And in not doing so, we annihilate ourselves. We take away our power. We give away our power. by not having responsibility. So, unpack that. That's what you have as number 3. Take responsibility for your life and how you show up in a relationship. You've got that in there because you are seeing that generally we tend not to. Fair?
Yeah, and if it's not modeled by our parents, like if our parents didn't model taking responsibility for their own behavior with one another, we see so much conflict that happens in front of us, but we don't often see the repair. So the parents often repair behind the closed doors, but it's actually really important that parents model repair with each other in front of us, but also with us. That creates the template. Harriet Lerner, who's a beautiful teacher, psychologist, she talks about how to be able to apologize to someone requires standing on a foundation of self-worth. Because when you're apologizing, you're saying, I'm sorry for what I did and the impact it had on you. I'm now able to hold that I let someone down, but I'm still whole. And actually, I would argue that the apologizing and taking responsibility actually fully integrates the self. Like it fully reinforces that we're someone who can take ownership for our lives. When we take responsibility for our lives and everything that we have said yes to and are currently saying yes to, we will usually be hit by a tsunami of the experience of like, if I've always had access to choice, why haven't I exercised it?
Yeah.
And so that's where often people go back to old behaviors because they can't hold the capacity for this level of power. And it's actually through that level of recognition of the power you have to choose your life that you get to say, hey, I see how I show up. I see how I've shown up. Here's what is mine. And if you're in a relationship, you're like, what's yours? And they're able to express that. And you might then say, because you want to tell them what you see as theirs that they might not see.
Right.
Is you actually open to curiosity and you say, what's mine that I don't see? What's yours that you don't see? And so you create this template of responsibility in the relationship. And look, like none of this is about perfection or like not getting it wrong. You're going to get it wrong. It's not about being perfect because again, that would be more of the childhood stuff playing out. It's about just recognizing progress and getting better each time. I'm always getting better. I'm never perfect. And having a kid really stretched my emotional capacity and emotional willpower. And then I was like, oh crap, I thought I was really good at communicating. There's more work here. And I think about it like, this is the gym. This is the gym. So when I look at taking responsibility, it's like nothing in your life can change till you take responsibility for your life. Like everything else is actually it rests on that precipice that must begin with I'm choosing my life. One sign that you don't have access to choice and you're not taking responsibility for your life is if you have anxiety, because anxiety generally is the symptom of suppressed emotion. But 2 is like if you don't have access to your voice and self-expression and your no, then you can't choose your life. And if you can't choose your life, it's going to go in a direction of maybe other people's expectations or where they want you to go. And that will show up as anxiety. And we're saying like, actually, everything that comes up in your body is valuable information. And society has taught us that negative, quote unquote, emotions are bad. And if you're depressed or you're anxious, there's something wrong with you. Or if you're sad. And it's like, well, actually, what happens if we say there's something right with you that you're feeling these feelings? Okay, what are they indicative of your environment? And what are they asking you to do? And that's where we're taking responsibility for our feelings. Or we're actually validating them instead of being like, here's something to numb your feeling. Instead being like, oh, there's actually wisdom in your depression. Oh, wait, your depression must be the exact appropriate response to the environment and relationships or circumstances of your life. Okay, what is depressive about it? Where can you not be fully you? Oh, okay, now we're going. Okay, what needs to change? Let's change those things. Now, obviously, that's simplifying it, but bringing back access to choice and responsibility is what allows people to shift that.
Goodness, Mark, I'm sitting here listening to you and you saying being responsible for your emotions, but for knowing what you're feeling even, I would say, gosh, yeah, I still tend to place that. I take responsibility for my actions, take responsibility for my feelings, maybe for my thoughts, but am I am I being responsible for my emotions, for being aware of my own, how I'm feeling? I think I've got a lot of work to do. We need to create a pie chart of responsibility. And I think because a lot of us who even think that, oh yeah, I take responsibility for me. Really? Probably on a spectrum, probably
I
some
think
areas
we're
where you
all,
do and
yeah.
some where you don't. Fair? Okay.
Yeah, I think we're all, because it's like every layer that you learn about yourself, it just, recognizes there's a new layer. Like when you become better at leadership, you can always get better at leadership. When you become better as a partner, you can always become better. Like it's like, again, it's orienting to, well, where I am on the spectrum is not evidence of a problem. It's actually evidence of potential.
Yeah.
Right. And that changes. So the shame isn't, because shame is usually what cripples us from moving forward. Instead, it's like, oh, this is pride. Like I can have pride for where I am, or even disappointment for where I am. But can I use the feeling? Ooh, we can have both pride and disappointment, but the disappointment actually fueling the change. Like, okay, that quote from Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. It's like, okay, well, you know better now. Are you going to do better? If you don't do better, then you're going to have dissonance and it's going to feed your addictions.
You did bring up, I think I've been marinating a little bit, Mark, on where we started on, figuring yourself out and then figuring yourself out within a relationship. And it's easy for me to look at, the kind of the thought of, hey, you figure yourself out first so you can come into the relationship whole and healthy and well. And yet I appreciate what you said, that it's only within the relationship that you're going to figure some of that out. I was talking yesterday, I think, on a show, and we hit on Maslow's pyramid, Maslow's hierarchy. And, you start at the bottom with kind of taking care of your own butt and survival, and then come to the top with self-actualization. That I'm thinking out loud as you've been talking, that I can only self-actualize so far by myself.
Right.
The rest of it's only going to come in relationship. So I appreciate you, because I think I've been taking the tact lately of going, gosh, I wish I had figured myself out first. Well, I do to a degree, as much as I could. I wish I had more self-awareness, that I'd gone through things like this book here and understood myself more. So, and then come into relationship to now start testing it, start stretching it, start unpacking more. In essence, that I can't be self-actualized in a vacuum, I guess, is what is where I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, you can't. And I would say the fastest pathway to self-actualization is actually through other. And it doesn't have to be romantic. I mean, you could have an addiction and that be a fast way to self-actualization, but it'll be through the resistance you experience relationally, because all the things that you're most afraid of exist in relationship. All the pains that are unresolved, just like you keep climbing to the top of the mountain with someone and it feels like the mountain just keeps getting bigger, like you never get to the top. But I think it's actually the state of being, that it's like we're moving to a place of curiosity.
Yeah.
Because when we have the perspective like, hey, I wish I'd figured this out earlier, we're still resistant to that. All the circumstances have created the ideal circumstance now to figure it out. So there can be this resistance to the path that walked us here, but it's actually without the path, you're not here. Without the path, you're not awake. So, I remember when I had this awareness that my 21-year-old version of me, I was very ashamed of, that I turned to more short-term relationships, that I ran from these betrayals and then went into the opposite direction and ran from connection, like true connection. I tried to control vulnerability. And I remember being very ashamed of that. And one day I was doing a meditation and I was recognizing, like, actually the gift to me moving forward integrated was to ask the 21-year-old version of me what got him to be that way. What could he teach me? And when I was meditating, I was exploring this question, and I was doing it with like a whole bunch of ages that I judged myself. And I felt 21-year-old me come back into my body. It was a crazy experience. I felt it come back into my body because I was welcoming him back. Instead of being ashamed of who he'd been, how he'd shown up, I was actually saying like, teach me about why we became that way.
Yeah.
And what we could have done. So it's like, if we can take the learnings and the challenges of our lives and actually ask what they can teach us, and then fully integrate them today, it removes the charge from them.
Mm.
And it doesn't mean we're not going to be like, I wish I'd learned how to communicate at 19, then I wouldn't have experienced the betrayals. But actually I needed the betrayal. Like, this is the curriculum, right? We all get born into different curriculum. I remember Ram Dass talking about how he didn't want to be on earth. He was talking to his teacher and Maharaji. And he said, well, while you're in school, why don't you take the curriculum? Thinking he was too enlightened to be on earth. And it's like, well, that thought means you need to be on earth.
It reminds me of you just bringing up entrepreneurship of, man, if I'm going to partner with you, I want somebody who's crashed and burned. That's how you learn. Who's been tested. As you're talking, number 3 here, again, take responsibility for your life and how you show up in relationships. The fourth one, Mark, is probably where I spent the most time in your book. It's devote to truth. Back to my thought of a pie chart with responsibility. If I've been responsible for being true, for telling the truth, which at face value is offensive, because I think of myself as a moral, ethical guy. I don't cheat. I don't steal. Of course I'm truthful. You truthful about your feelings, Kevin? No. And again, that was one of those things that was held as a valiant, righteous thing to do. I'm going to hold how to win friends, influence people. I'm not telling you that what I think about you or how I feel or that I was offended. I'm just going to people please in that. Again, I'm exaggerating. I love how to win friends, influence people, guys. I mean, the concept of that is great for personal relationship skills to a point, but in the intimate world that we're talking about here, devoting to truth. And that has been one of the primary missing links for me, being true and authentic so I wasn't honest with myself, with how I felt. And some of that, I just was ignorant. I just didn't know what I didn't know. Again, I did what I didn't. I'd be like saying, so you learned to speak Greek when you grew up, right? Because your parents spoke Greek. Well, no, they didn't. And to be honest about my feelings, I had incredible parents. That wasn't a part of that. I got the how to win friends and influence people and how to perform and connect. And that gave great fruit. There was great fruit. There were some other things that I missed, just as all of us in our upbringing. We can't have everything. And the truth of how we feel. So have I unpacked that fairly as far as that's what you're getting to in Liberated Love? We've got to be devoted to the truth of how we feel about ourselves with the other person and sharing that.
Yeah, I think if I was to write a book like How to Win Friends and Influence People, it might be Liberated Love, actually, when I think about it, because to me, it'd be like, how do you create real friendships?
Yeah.
And how do you influence people in a way that is in service of them, not just you?
Right.
Because I think a lot of that work, which I was a big fan, I have lots of those books, especially in my sales days, was this, because being able to converse and build rapport with people is important in order to influence them. And actually, like, one of the greatest predictors of relational outcome is being open
let me give
to influence.
Credit to that. My kids we had them all at the local farmer's market, and they sold stuff at a booth, wood projects and coffee and all kinds of stuff. And so I had them read the kind of key points of how to win friends and influence people. Stand up straight, give a good handshake, smile, say the person's name. And that's great stuff for connecting with somebody and giving them the opportunity to sell their, home roasted coffee. That was not an intimate long-term relationship. So yeah, keep going.
No. And for people to actually step into that space of that principle of being dedicated to truth is saying, like, to love someone is to tell them the truth. Look at our society. We are dancing around truth. I would say that social media has really created the circumstances, and cancel culture has caused people to be overtly afraid of sharing what they actually feel. This just creates the further division between each other. Because
can you separate real quick, Mark, as you're saying that? Because I know I actually looked at your Instagram page right now, and folks, I'll probably put this in the intro. You've got like 1.1 million people on social media. So even as you have some criticism about it, and I saw a post that you did and you were frustrated with some aspects of that, but when you say that people don't share the truth, separate that. Cause I bet a lot of people think, they do. Everybody comes out there and they share their opinion like crazy.
Yeah.
Here's my megaphone and I'm going to tell you what I think. It's not how you feel though. Is that a fair separation?
Yeah. And you're open to your opinion, but not another person's.
Yeah.
And, we were speaking earlier about how like actually every perspective is broadened by the information of another perspective, even if we vehemently disagree with it. Because it's actually like when you think about a relationship, there's subjective truths, right? Like your and I experience of a conflict or even this podcast could be totally different, right? Like I could leave it, I'm feeling enlivened by it. I think it's awesome.
Well, let's play with that. The objective reality is we are doing a podcast. That is an absolute fact right now. Now, everything after that's subjective because I might go away and go, man, that was one of the best ones I've ever done. And Mark says that was absolutely misery. I can't believe it went that long and I wasted my time. There's
Right.
objective and subjective. Okay.
Right. And to recognize that your experience of it or my experience of it, neither is right.
Yeah.
But what happens is, and you see this obviously politically, it's just so amplified. And I know people are very sensitive to that subject, but it's actually when we don't talk about it because of the sensitivity that we get further divided because neither of us very few of us live on the far right or the far left, 0.1% of the population. So that means 99.8% of us only have these two seemingly options. And if we are anywhere in between, we have all these things that we categorize as right, all these things we categorize as left. And it's a way humans do this because they're called decision heuristics. It's a way like if let's say you spoke up about something to do with taxes, immediately it's like, must be a right winger. What else goes
it's
with
stereotyping because it's efficient. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's efficient and it allows me to dismiss you immediately. And this obviously can happen on both sides. But what's interesting is like the sides are, and we know this, right? Is like they're a false binary. Just like all the ways that we're discussing things are false binaries. You can be pro-life and pro-choice. Again, very sensitive subject. I recognize that and I want to acknowledging that. But really there's a line between where people believe life ends and life begins. And that's what we're arguing about.
I love that. I use that one because I look at that and somebody who's vehement on either side, to some degree, I respect both of them because they value life. There's a lot of people don't give a crap at all. And these folks both value life. I'm going to put them on the same platform. Say, these are both life. If I've got an endeavor over here that's based on valuing life, I might want both of them. They're both proponents of valuing life. Now they have a delineation in there, but it does put them to me somewhat on the same platform from people, a lot of folks who just don't at all.
Yeah, so it's beautiful because then it gives like, okay, well, if both have validity, because the immediate thing we do is, well, they're wrong and I'm right. And so now I live through this righteous lens that I want to be around people who homogeneously think like me. It's like wanting to date someone who's you. You don't want to date someone who's you. There's no mystery, right? Like that's why difference, I would say not ill values, but difference of perspective is really valuable in relationship. When two people have a conflict romantically, it's an opportunity to deepen trust and intimacy and knowing of one another. And if you and I experience this podcast differently, and then we talk about the differences, we are then informed on how to be better for one another. So there is no two perspectives when explored that aren't improved. Because I think this is true about medical intervention. This is true about gender. This is true about all these sensitive subjects that we seem to say, if you are critical of it, you are against it. And it's like, no, curiosity is not rejection.
Yeah.
And that's these seeming binaries is what tries to keep us safe. You're anti, you're pro, you're this, you're that. And I say all that because like the truth is that we're struggling to talk about these things. And the subjective truth is that you have an opinion and I have an opinion. But actually, if we hear each other, we're made better.
Yeah.
And I think social media has amplified, especially because of cancel culture and because politicians are not modeling this. I don't even think they're doing a debate. And I'm not American, but I don't think the presidents are even doing a debate.
Yeah.
And it's like the argument often is we don't want to platform another perspective. Righteousness, infantilization of the people. We don't believe you can handle diverse perspectives, so we're going to protect you from other perspectives. It's righteousness and it's toxicity dressed up as altruism. But again, it infantilizes the people and parentifies whoever's saying that. And this is why people feel so frustrated. But this is also what happens in relationship is we say, I don't trust that you can handle my feelings, so I'm going to hide my feelings from you. But what that does is it creates a hierarchy and resentment. And what happens is now I'm saying, well, you can't handle it. So I get to blame you because you can't handle it. But what I'm also doing is saying, I'm here, you're here because you're the one who can't handle it.
Yeah.
So now we can't meet. And I'm never giving you the information that allows you to come here or me to come down, right?
Will you give an analogy, everybody, because even that so we're talking about again number 4, and this is the one that really popped out to me most, devoting to the truth, and it's because of my own bias of knowing that that's what I had. It's a big violation of mine in relationships, in intimate relationships, is being
to
honest.
not tell the truth.
Not telling the truth, but it's the truth of, again, my feelings. But I want to model that because I had to learn this, because it went from going, okay, Mark, dude, what you just said, you were such a jerk. You were okay. And the counselor says, no, use your feelings, Kevin. Okay, Mark, well, I feel like you're a jerk. No. It's you just change the word think to feel. That's not, it's what do you feel? What do you feel, Kevin? I'm like, oh, what do I feel? Okay, get Brené's book out. Let's see. I feel, okay, Mark. So I asked this question when you said blah, 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 blah. What I heard, my own perception, my own story, I felt kind of humiliated because I felt like you kind of contradicted, what I said. And so I'm sitting here feeling a little humiliated. Can we talk about, is there a better way to unpack that? Because I didn't do either. I in my past, I wouldn't have told you were a jerk. I would have just sat here and I withdrew. I just avoided. I heard that it bothered me. I may not have even known why. And I just kind of severed relationship. And come into this. So again, devoting to the truth, you're talking about, that's what I just brought up, because you said we're talking about the truth of how you feel, but it needs to come across in a way. If I say it in a way of, here's how I heard it, it's not offensive to you because I didn't label you. Is that okay? Did I get it right? Yeah.
Yeah. And what you'll usually see relationally is you got one person who's conflict avoidant. And so
that's me. Right.
So their work is to come towards, but the work of the two people is to create a safe space, right? To say, like, whatever you bring forward, you might sense me get reactive. You might notice in my face, my reactivity, but I'll actually breathe into curiosity. So like, no matter what you bring here, it's safe to bring it. If we think about that in the context of your example, like another one would be, I'm actually afraid that we might break up. Especially if we start to read some book or listen to this podcast, I'm afraid that we might break up. You got to bring that truth because it's a truth. So you bring it forward. I'm afraid we might break up. I'm afraid you might cheat. I'm afraid you might do this. Bring it forward because it's material to work with. When you talk about the experience of humiliation, the structure of the language we talked about, like, because there's the competence part of relating, and that's important to build the skill set. So when you said, my response was I felt humiliated. Some of the language we use is like, in my experience, when this happened. So as soon as I say in my experience, that's mine. You have yours.
Yeah.
My language
is responsibility. Back to that.
Right. And I'm leaving space for you by saying there's a recognition unspoken that you have one too. So in my experience, when you just shared that you were humiliated based on the circumstances, first off, I want to validate your experience of humiliation, and I want to hear more about it. So is there anything else you want to share? And then you could share what's more. Harville Hendricks and Helen Hunt have a conversational design, which you could share a link to in the show notes, called Imago Dialogue. And it's a way of structuring dialogue that's very similar to how countries navigate conflict, which they could probably do a little better job at it. They might need to invest in Imago right now. But the way it's structured is really powerful. And what it does is it's first you say, do you have a second to talk? And so you actually ask for consent instead of going right in. And then you express, the other person mirrors and validates. And then so you can't actually give your opinion on what the other person's sharing. You're only asking questions. And this is actually where the nervous systems start to be recalibrated. It could be helpful to have a trained therapist or coach helping because they're moderating it and like making sure that they're kind of refereeing it, you know? And that I was saying there's two types. There's the person who like is conflict avoidant, but then there's also the person who brings forward stuff, but they might say, well, this is just who I am. And really that's again because they're afraid of being rejected. So they just go in as if there's no option or feedback to how they're showing up. I see that a lot with people who it's the way their wound is leading and they feel powerful. They feel they're not open to influence from the partner and the partner's experience. So one is avoiding anything and the other one is saying, this is just how it is. Well, that's not relational.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's not saying, as you and I were talking about, like you have an experience of a humiliation of this. I want to understand your humiliation. I want to see if there's anything else. So it's always closing with, did I get that right? So you would share what happened. I would then say, based on what I'm hearing you say, it sounds like,
Yeah.
did I get that right? You could say yes or no. And then I'd ask more questions if you said no. And then I would say, I'd summarize it all again. And then I'd say, is there anything else? And you get to say, yeah, actually there is. Or no, that feels good. And that, what that does is it starts to create deep safety for conversation.
Yeah.
Again, you can do this at any time in your relationship, start to build this in. It'll sound a little clinical at first or like structured.
Yeah.
And it needs
I mean, I've done it. It feels contrived and
yeah, it is contrived at first.
But if we both understand that we're trying to, it feels like trying to dance when you don't know how to dance. And,
Yeah,
and I felt ridiculous with it. And yet, but I understand the concept of if I don't, or no, I shouldn't say it. The opportunity here is to be honest with you in a way that doesn't blame you. It doesn't accuse you. It gives you no threat.
Right.
So
then you're more likely to listen.
Yes. Yeah. And to come back and go, so do you feel, I love that. Do you feel understood? You know, because a lot of times I'm thinking, not yet, but we're getting there. Then we keep going. And it's significant, but it's like, I'm going to go back to, you know, it's like learning a different language.
It really is. It is a different language and that creates different relationships, right? It's like, it's a different skill. So what happens is you take turns processing whatever you're processing. And so both people get a chance to fully be heard. You know, if you're someone who shuts down, it's like, I really wanted to shut down and withdraw. And it's taking everything in me to stay here and have this conversation. Imagine hearing your partner being like, oh, wow. So if I hear you correctly, like our conversation is really activating you. It's triggering you. And you want to leave, but you're choosing to stay. Am I getting that right? Ah, yeah. Is there anything else you want to share? Like how, imagine if, what is possible for relationship when we do that, when we model it? Because what happens is people go, well, they need to go first. And it's like, if you're always waiting for other people to go first, you'll never create it. Take responsibility for your stuff and just get it done. And, you know, like do it yourself. Like be the one who models it. One person can change a relationship by the way they change how they relate, but they can never do the work of two people. That's an important delineation.
Well, thanks for saying that, because that's been a thing through marriage counseling. I've heard, you know, one person can try to do it, but I've looked at that and felt like, yeah, but if I'm doing that and my wife's totally ignorant of it, I really had a hard time doing it and not feeling manipulative. Like I am doing this looking for a certain outcome and it felt really bad. Like if we're going to do this, I need to be on the same page.
And like if all of a sudden you're used to getting defensive or shutting down and you stay a little longer and all of a sudden you say, hey, I see some truth in what you're saying. Tell me about it.
Yeah.
You are changing the dance of the relationship. And that can often cause the other person, they are like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
Like, oh, did you just do that because the therapist told you? Right?
Yeah, yes, actually I am. That is
right. And what they're trying to do is do what they call a change back move. And it's trying to get people back into a familiar dance. Because in order to change, you have to build the capacity to hold everything that change brings. And to do that, you have to have tools like breath work, meditation. Like you start to build this ability to be self-reflective. You build more space in your conversations by having more space in yourself, more window of tolerance, your nervous system.
Yeah.
But also by having people around you Like listening to a podcast like this, we're both regulated. We're having a healthy dialogue. And for someone, that's why a therapist is so powerful, because the therapist is modeling regulation. And then unconsciously, we're actually learning what regulation feels like, what safety feels like.
Yeah.
For a lot of couples, that could be something they've never or not had in 10 years, 20 years. So it's not going to happen overnight.
Well, like you said, if it was never modeled, if conflict and repairing, if conflict wasn't modeled or repairing wasn't modeled, I mean, yeah, this is a new language. I mean, part of this is what we're talking about right now in this, like that aspect of how to do it well, how to say it, in a way that's non-threatening. It goes to number 5 here on the list of liberating love. Is number 5 is honoring someone else's path alongside our own. Now, again, I think most well-meaning people are going to go, well, I do. That's going to be their, I mean, it feels threatening to even say that. Well, of course I honor their path, but give me the but, because it's in there, because I'm guessing that you see that we often don't. And that's what always gets to me, is what I feel like the most dangerous thing is when we think we do. For me, it is. It's what you say that, well, I do that. And you're going, well, and I've had therapists go, you're love your heart, Kevin, but you're not actually. So tell us how we're generally often not.
Well, that sense of defensive is like, no, but I do. And then what really happens there is we're rejecting the feedback of someone else's experience that could liberate us and make us better, right? Like we're actually rejecting feedback that could improve who we are, how we show up to life, the joy we experience, the well-being, the intimacy, the trust, the connection. I think this really correlates to number 6, which is like this mutual sense of positive regard for self and other. And I say that because...
Well, can I read it?
Yeah.
So that is number 6. So number 5, honoring someone else's path alongside our own. Number 6, practice unconditional positive regard for both self and others. So yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Yeah. And the reason I bring those two together is because if I can practice regard for self and other, a lot of the time what gets confused for people, especially if they're, we define codependency in the book as any relational dynamic where we source safety, security at the expense of from someone or something, at the expense of ourself, our own needs, our own overall well-being. And so really the key is at the expense of. So a lot of the time when people are used to sacrificing who they are, maybe they don't have access to their voice needs, blah, blah, blah. What happens is when you tell them, hey, like, start to stand in what you value and what is, if we were operating in a mutual sense of positive regard, what is that standard for how we're going to behave and communicate? So respect is the baseline.
Yeah.
Like that's the baseline. If that's not there, nothing else is there. So can we raise this standard that we're going to operate and communicate at this baseline? Like we're not going to call each other names. We're not going to minimize, belittle. We're not going to do any of that. There's no space for disrespect. When that happens, to finish the thought of like, we often confuse unconditional love with unconditional tolerance. But love is not tolerating BS. Love is standards. Love is boundaries. To say your addiction is impacting us, it's impacting you, is love. That's fierce truth. Your addiction, the thing you're doing, the way, what I'm tolerating is not love. And that's the side of the enabler and in the dynamic we know more from addiction. And so to actually operate in the place where we're honoring each other's path, how this has shown up at work for me is I was going to let this person go a couple of years ago, maybe it was 3 years ago. And I was like, she's got a family. Like, I'm afraid, she's not going to be able to support her family. She won't find another job. And I remember talking to my friend and he said, how do you know that it's not the greatest gift? If it's coming up for you, then why you not trusting it is you thinking you know better than God, that you know better than divine alignment, that you're saying what's coming up for you is wrong instead of right, and actually exactly in service of you and her. And so when I let her go, she ended up finding more of a dream job, more aligned, more everything. And I remember just having this awareness, like trusting her path as hers and mine as mine. And the more I trust mine as mine, the more I'm trusting hers as hers. So I'm not trying to keep my wife in my life by controlling or unconsciously doing something. I'm honoring what is coming up for me and what is coming up for her. And because we can have those conversations, we're more likely to keep the path aligned.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about the deviations and the desires. They're not unspoken. I remember working with this woman who, she was an actress. She quit being an actress because her partner would always talk crap about her acting. And I was like, well, first off, that's not a great sign. They're no longer together, which is not a shock. But I said to her, when you get to the basis of, so she would like come out with something, like be a new role, and he would be like, I think you could have done this better, or da-da-da-da. And when I got to the depth of what he was really trying to do, is he was afraid that if she became successful, they lived in a smaller city, she would have to move, and he couldn't move because he was, he had a shared custody with someone else. He wouldn't be able to move. So instead, he would talk crap about her acting instead of communicating his fears. He's not honoring her path as her own. He's trying to corral and control her path to be aligned with his. If he could just speak to the fear he has and still say, I want you to do everything you can. I have a friend, now friend, but used to be work for me. And I remember one day, this person said to me, if at any point this isn't aligned or this doesn't work, or you can't afford to pay me, I want you to know that you can let me go. And I love you, and I know that you support me fully, and it will never be personal. And I was like, works, this stuff works.
Yeah.
I was like, this stuff works, man. Like, that's liberated relating.
Yeah.
That there's no hook, there's no codependent hook that's going into me, where their fear is actually making it so I'm trying to hold on and work more to try to create this income for someone else. And now I'm losing myself, I'm losing me because I'm afraid of actually this person not having to stand on their feet and be resourceful, if that makes sense.
It does. And it brings me back, Mark, to just threat. That's a word that I don't hear as much, but it's the one that comes up that at the core, I guess we reference it as fear. But what is it that we're threatened by? We have fear of, if we could be fearless, or if I could be secure. So if I'm in a business relationship, even with you, Mark, and I knew, fairy godmother came along, whatever, and said, hey, just so you know, Mark will never be offended by anything. So you have no reason to not be honest. Be honest with how you feel, not accusations, blame, whatever, but just how you feel. Okay, so Mark, I felt you did whatever, I felt humiliated. Mark, you did something. Oh, it made me feel like you don't trust me. Or Mark, whatever. That I can do that. You're never going to be offended. That's the spirit that we're looking for here. And the methodology that you help us understand in the book, because, I feel like we're going to have hit 5% by the time we're done with the show. But the methodology say you can do that in a way that lessens the possibility of threat and fear for the other person. We can help you do that. Okay, so there's that. Then though, and because I just at a high level here, I think you would also say, but if the person does react poorly, fearful, threat, blame, accusation, if they do the worst, that's probably best as well. You need to know that, because otherwise you're just being dishonest to yourself. That's not going to work either. Did I paint a relevant picture there?
Yeah, we have a chapter in the book called Trust the Triggers.
Yeah.
And really just saying, like, yes, I could do everything in my power, the structure of my language. I can learn all those skills, and you could still get defensive and reactive. You could shut down, you could gaslight me, you could do all the things. But I'm so deeply embedded in my own self that I'm able to delineate what's mine and what's yours. Like, I remember years ago, someone saying to me, like, I can't believe you're not doing that. That's so selfish. and it was a business relationship. And I was like, is it? Feels like I'm being, like my gut started to go like, old me would have been like, oh my God, I don't want to be seen as selfish. Like I definitely need to make sure I do everything they're asking.
Mm-hmm.
But I could feel like in my gut, okay. So then I went to a friend who I know tells me the truth. And I said, here's the circumstances. Here's how I've shown up. Is it an accurate reflection that I'm being selfish? And they were like, no, it's not. And I was like, I knew it. And I could sense that normal people pleaser in me would have then gone and done the thing so I didn't have to deal with being called selfish. But instead, I just knew myself and my own behaviors were in integrity. But I also had the humility to figure out if they weren't.
Yeah.
And that really freed, because then I was like, I hear your request. I hear you calling me selfish. That doesn't align for me. And I'm not going to do the thing you're asking. And I allow them to be disappointed in me. But when we're people pleasers, we don't have the capacity to hold the guilt.
Yeah.
But we can actually increase our capacity for guilt. And because the guilt doesn't go anywhere, especially if you were raised Catholic, it's like, that's a weapon of it. And obviously I'm generalizing, but it's like, when guilt has been weaponized to get us to comply with behaviors or in families as kids, then it will often be the thing we're most susceptible that makes us abandon ourselves. And so, there's this really beautiful opportunity for us to learn ourselves so well that when someone tells us who we are, we're able to actually delineate whether it's true.
Yeah. It has me coming back to again, without a lot of context, I don't want to go too far, but the vibration aspect. I was reading recently on that of just when you feel great, when you're in I had a kid, one of my kids was sharing with me, she drove up into the woods with a couple friends and another sibling, and they were driving along this creek bed along the canyon and playing music. And she said, Dad, I just felt great. The word she didn't use it, but what I heard was euphoric. She said, I just felt, and I'm reading this book. I thought she was vibrating perfectly. She was in harmony with her surroundings, with her feelings, with that. So that's great. I say there's a preface to come over here back to this somatic aspect, which that's not the sole focus of our show here, but that for those of us who are ignorant of a lot of these concepts, that you're saying that at the least pay attention to your body, your nervous system, and you at least be aware enough to know that, oh, I feel bad.
Yeah.
That feels bad. I don't know what, I don't know what, but it just it feels bad. And in my history would be hardly even being aware of that. But if I could at least pull myself out of that, something feels bad right there. Stop, note it. If you can't deal with it right now, come back to it and figure that stuff out. It matters. It matters. Mm-hmm. It matters. It matters. If there's going to be a relationship with yourself and with this person, you've got to address it. It feels like I keep pulling it back to this elementary aspect because I'm reading, and in your info feels so hopeful, but I've got to do the work. And I realize that so many of us, we look at this, and again, it's like such a different language. We've got to come back. And I hear you saying we've got to be true to ourselves. And if it feels bad, it's bad. Not the person, not you, but if it's bad, it's got to be, you've got to deal with it. Well, you don't have to. You don't. If you want to survive, you don't have to. Just survival. If we want to thrive, we've got to give it credit. Fair enough?
Yeah, and I can sense that, like, even the things we're talking about, someone might be like, this is like a lot to think about. And it's like, I promise you that if you read our book, it is structured in a way that will allow you to work through and move through because it's structured in a way to build upon one thing upon the other. When someone, even listening to this podcast, you'd be in the top 1%, not way higher, top 0.1% of humans just for knowledge about these things, like self-awareness. And the greatest predictor of your health is the quality of your relationships. You know that book done by Bronnie Ware. She's a palliative care nurse, and she has a book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying.
I reference it in my book. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I think 4, like I have it up, 4 of them are relational. But like the courage to live a life true to yourself, I wish I hadn't worked so hard.
Yeah.
I wish I'd had the courage to express myself. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. I wish that I'd let myself be happier.
Let myself be happy. That's the one that floors me. Yeah.
It's like, let yourself create it. Someone the other day was saying to me, like asking this advice about a relationship, saying like, I'm asking him where we're at. And he told me he's not ready for a relationship. Like I'm seeking clarity. And I was like, stop seeking clarity, create clarity. He's already told you what's clear for him. It's not clear for you. So that means it's not his, it's yours. And it's like happiness as a term, I think it's an emotional experience. And that's why happiness isn't a state. And happiness, I could tell someone that something happened to their dog and in a moment they're not happy. But if they're seeking well-being, then your overall state doesn't shift when you've structured your life around feeling a sense of connectedness. Because like a fulfilling life isn't one free of grief. It's one where you experience the grief and you're able to process it and be with it. And it will usually, I would say almost always, deepen your human experience.
Yeah.
So, the ability to be with everything, when I would argue that almost everything that is sold to us is sold to have us not be with the thing. Like we try to protect people from feeling things that we don't know the value of the feeling. So like if I'm going through a breakup and I've used grief as a way to transform my life, then I will never try to save someone from grief. If I've been depressed and it was, I forget who said this. I think it's J.R. Tolkien. But it's like rock bottom was the foundation to which I built my life upon. Maybe it was what's her name, J.K. Rowling. I can't remember. One of those acronym names.
It brings me to saying, to me stating who I am, who I want to be. I'm Kevin. I want to be at the core peace, joy, harmony, whatnot. And then to reference Brene again, to look at these 87 emotions, that those are emotions like, happiness, sadness, grief, whatever, that visit me, that are upon me. Somebody said that sadness is upon, I'm not sad, but sadness is upon me right now. And as you said, I'm going to honor that, which my therapist said, Kevin, sit in it. Don't medicate it. Don't run away. Don't go on a bike ride. Will you sit in and experience and let it do something for you? I haven't, because I again just looked at it as negative. Yeah. It's not something that should, no, let it be with me, not be me, not overtake me. Even that, like depression. I read that recently, that I don't want to ever say that I am depressed. Kevin is depression, but man, right now some things have happened, and there's some depressed feelings on me. I'm dealing with it. That feels like what you're referring to here.
Yeah, imagine being okay with feeling something and not trying to do something about it right away. And from a nervous system perspective, not going to a tool of distraction allows us to what they call ride the wave.
Yeah.
So you're like riding the wave of the activation, and then you realize that it resolves. It's like when you see an animal almost die, what happens is that animal will shake. You see them shake and then get up and go about their day, because what they're doing is dissipating the energy from their system. Most of us never do that.
Yeah.
So we're stuck in nervous system responses: fight, flight, freeze, fawning. Fawning is really people pleasing. So if you're someone who identifies as a people pleaser or conflict avoidant, you're stuck in a fawn state, which is good to know, because then you can change it.
Mark, I've heard that 100 times, but it's almost always presented as fight, flight, freeze.
Yeah, they added fawn to it. I want to say it probably became more part of the conversation, probably like 5-6 years ago.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. Totally. I've not heard it literally. And I've heard, gosh, I had, you know, big name psychologist on last week and we talked about the three, not the fawning. That's interesting.
Yeah, they might couple fawning in freeze.
Okay.
Also, fight is sometimes, or flight. Flight is sometimes towards, right? We think it's always away, but it can actually be towards.
That's fair.
When people start to we talk about the nervous system and the overlap with attachment in the book, because really I think no healing is complete without the understanding of the nervous system. And that's why we wanted to include it, because, you know, my wife and I both were like, man, some of our most profound awarenesses were understanding how our nervous system is correlated to our attachment style.
Yeah.
And that there's brilliance in the nervous system's response. But if we haven't, you know, I was sharing that story about being in freeze and then that causing the symptoms were confusion, uncertainty, lack of direction. But once you get to the baseline of what's below that, Britt Frank, as she talks about in her book, I know you've talked to her, The Science of Stuck, is really like actually being stuck is being frozen.
Yeah. Huh, yeah. Britt Frank. So folks, he referenced her book. Yeah. Is The Science of Stuck. That was probably 2023. And I think you were either on her show or had her on your show recently.
On mine, yeah. She's brilliant.
Yeah. It's significant to look at. I mean, there's so much overlap, but everybody has a different way. And you brought out things. Yeah. We could keep going for the next day. I do want to give just a quick overview. I mean, we just went over the 6 parts of Liberated Love Is. Now, the book is set into 3 parts totally.
Yeah.
Name those for us. Relationship 1.0. Keep going.
Sacred Pause, and then Relationship 2.0.
Just give us an overview. I mean, Relationship 1.0, and you start off with the Great Disconnect. I literally, Mark, I have pages of notes on this. So I'm studying this stuff. So Relationship 1.0, you know, the Great Disconnect, the Sacred Pause, and then Relationship 2.0. We're looking at a process. You just mentioned the book that it's a lot. It is a lot. But to brag, I mean, that's why you have, over 1 million people, I think, following you on Instagram, is because there is a methodology here and there is hope. We do have to do the work. The book does a great part of dissecting this. I mean, even in Relationship 1.0, I think there's five points in there to work through. And I went through and it was incredible looking at our blind spots, looking at the mother-father threshold, getting honest with that. I mean, these are significant pieces that I appreciate how you put the book together that allow us to work through that. So, but I say all that, again, give us a snapshot of those 3 parts then.
Yeah. So really we take what feels complex and simplify it so that you don't have to get overwhelmed. And the beautiful thing about a book, which is honoring your pace, is like you can put it down, you can pick it back up. Yeah. Just make sure you pick it up and finish it. Especially if you're someone who's not prone to finishing things, because that means you're not prone to seeing things through, which means you're not prone to transformation, which is probably because you're afraid to become everything that you're capable of being. And so we can be with that truth and then say, okay, but this time show up. And that maybe you need a little David Goggins in your ear for that kind of transformation. There's something valuable to that. The book, Relationship 1.0, is really looking at what created why you do what you do. So it's looking at your relationship blueprint, what you learned. And it also tells client stories. It also tells client stories because really humans learn through narrative. So we tell client stories, we give examples, we share our own relationship journey. And then Sacred Pause is, okay, we've learned what made you do what you do. Let's take a break for a second. And we use the analogy of the cocoon. So let's just go in a cocoon for a little bit. If you're so whether you're single, dating, or in a relationship, this book talks through that process. Okay, what does it mean? Let's just take a pause from who we've been. Let's create some space. That's the nervous system, right? We're going to create some rules about this time. You're going to create them yourself. And what are we going to do in this pause is we're going to learn, we're going to regroup, and we're going to say, hey, actually what we've been doing, no longer what we want to do. What do we want to do? Okay, we'll get clear on that. We do that in the book. And then Relationship 2.0. What's possible now? what does that look like? And so the sacred pause is essentially we talk about our time apart, where Kylie and I were apart. We talk about other people navigating breakups, getting to this precipice of should we stay together or break up? Or if we're in a dating pattern, how we're stopping that dating pattern, dating unavailable people, not being able to receive love. We cover all that. And then relationship 2.0 is really the exploration of like, what is the gold that lives in the possibility of living from a place where your relationship is informing you, you know, as you said, Maslow's, that it is the path or one path to self-actualization. So how do we do that? What does it actually look like to be in liberated love? So, you know, my wife and I in no way are like, hey, we're perfect. And we're speaking to you from a pulpit being like, hey, you guys, you regular people. We're like, no, we're in the trenches with you. And everything in that book, we know works because we live it and we've lived it. And we know, like, one of the hardest things is like, I know I want to change something relationally, but how do I do it? And the book really walks you through, okay, here's like some practical, simple ways to actually completely transform how you relate. Like, stop waiting, stop hoping, stop wishing, like actually get into action and take responsibility for the dream that you have, for what you want to create. Like, great love doesn't come to you. Great love is created.
You, in looking at that relationship 1.1, the vision I had was playing tennis. It's a great one, or golf. Both are great ones. You don't have to have any training. You can go out and just go do it. And you can go do it, and you can do it a bunch, and you'll create really bad form. It's just,
Right.
if you have no
I
training.
have that in golf, actually.
Yeah. And you can hit the ball and you may get it in the hole once in a while, and you can play tennis and get it over the net. But that's what we did. We just kind of went out. We learned it. If our dad told us and he stunk, he just, you went out and you played with dad, whatever. And there we are. It's the inherited patterns is what you talked about at the beginning of the show. And there we are. So now it's the pause of going, well, it's there going, gosh, what did you learn? And
Right.
learning that you probably have a bunch of bad patterns, bad techniques. The sacred pause of going, to some extent, hey, do you want to play tennis? Do you want to play golf? You don't have to. Nobody has to be in a relationship. You don't have to be married. You don't have to have a significant other. You don't have to have kids. You don't have to have close friends. You don't have to, but take a pause. What do you want? Which is, gosh, that's so much the focus of my book. What drives you? What does drive you, and why? Do you know? And then, granted that you say, yeah, I want to do this. It's okay. What does that look like? And like tennis, again, doesn't mean that if I decide I want to play and I want to have good form with tennis or golf, I'm still me. I'm not giving up myself. Back to your authenticity. It's taking the authentic Kevin and to some degree saying, let's be more authentic. That's how you have good form. That's hopeful for everyone to be more of who you are. Is that, I hadn't even thought about that. To some degree, you're saying liberated love is you get to be more of you. How great is that? And it's better for everyone. Well, that's a win.
Who doesn't want that? It's like, we pursue our dreams after we break up. We do everything we want when our relationships are over. We're like, why wouldn't you just do everything you want in your relationship? Why wouldn't you pursue your dreams in the relationship? Like, two people walking side by side with the intention for both people to become all of who they are. It shouldn't be a foreign concept. It's crazy that we do it when we're single or we do it in friendships, but we don't do it romantically with the people that we're probably most afraid of being rejected by, that we could actually be the place where we are most welcomed, coming back to that quote.
That's what I found in the book, Mark. That's why you're sitting here and I wanted to have this conversation. It's so hopeful. I love how you created it, and to your aspect of your own stories in there. I think the first thing I saw after Thais connected us, I don't know how it would have been, but I saw you, I was probably just doing my research, and it was you and Kylie, and you were maybe on Vienna's show. It was a clip of you guys talking about your breakup, and you were in tears, man.
Oh, yeah, that's what happens when you get interviewed by a therapist.
Yeah, well, fair. And I was touched, and the book touched me so much. The stories did. And again, I've got pages of notes. It's one to work through. You make it so tangible. And I appreciate you guys, your heart and your effort to bring it forth. I'm honored to spread your message. And I think I'm most grateful. No, I know I am to benefit from it for myself and those I'm in relationship with. And thank you for what you guys are doing. Thank you for giving me your time and benefiting my life.
Well, man, thanks so much for having me. Thank you for your curiosity, your humility, your desire to ask questions. I consider it a great honor that people trade their time to listen to this, to watch this, that you trade your time and trust me with the people who follow you and listen to you and are guided through you. And that means a lot. So to all of you listening and watching, I'm so grateful. I do not take it for granted. It's like, this is fuel for me in terms of like holding me to account with my own integrity and how I live and love.
Yeah. Mark, thanks.
Well, thanks, friends, for joining me on this journey. You can find Mark Groves at markgroves.com. You can type in right now on whatever platform you're listening to your podcast, Mark Groves Podcast. And again, his book, Liberated Love, you can find that anywhere, everywhere. Got a question about this, a thought, something you're pondering, let me know. If it's for Mark, I'll let him know and get a response to you. Email me at kmiller@kevinmiller.co. Ultimately, I hope this episode helps you drive further, and most of all, enjoy the ride.
Thanks so much for joining me on this journey. I look forward to meeting you in the Drive Tribe community for ongoing discussions about each episode. You can subscribe to the Drive Drop newsletter for weekly updates. Find it all at kevinmiller.co, along with all our social media and video clips. Until next time, I hope this episode helps you drive further and enjoy the ride.